about with masks is the Chinese. So the Chinese used and still use masks in theater, mainly the Chinese opera. These types of theatrical masks are believed to have originated in ancient Chinese religious ceremonies, as are many of the masks that I will show in this presentation. So this mask, for example, this is a typical Chinese opera mask, and it's used in many forms of dance and other forms of theater as well. So many times Chinese opera masks will sometimes have an opening, so singing is made easier. And also, you can see by the colors, again, of the mask, a lot of different emotions are portrayed just based on the colors, because facial expression is obviously impossible with that type of mask. Again, these are used a lot in today's culture as well as back further into ancient Chinese times, and there's a rich tradition, especially in Beijing, of the opera. So similar to Chinese masks, we're going to move on to Korean masks. So like the Chinese mask, you can see these are some examples of Korean masks, a little bit different than Chinese, but similar in many ways. With Korean masks, they also originated in religious ceremonies. The masks were related to the practice of what's called shamanism, and so Korean masks are used in theater, and actually dance is more common in Korean masks because they're not as well equipped for singing like the Chinese opera ones are. And they often represent famous Korean historical figures and with very pronounced facial features. So actually you can see that in this picture, especially down here. The facial features are very much exaggerated, and they're very much the actor is forced to, especially the dancer even, is forced to portray his physical characteristics based on the face that they're given, based on the character they're chosen to represent. And so a lot of the dramas, especially in Korean, are very, what we would, a Western audience might perceive as a little bit like overacting, but at the same time they're required to overact, because with this mask and with that type of exaggerated facial feature, it's required. You need to overact in order to portray the character correctly. So moving away from Asia, we have Rome and Renaissance Italy. We're very famous for masks, and Commedia dell'arte is full of these types of masks, and it goes back to the 6th century. So they're used in Rome, and later, especially, they're cultivated in Renaissance Italy. Masks were used much like they were, for example, in Greek theater, and in Greek theater masks were very important, seeing as that all the actors were male, portraying female characters. Masks made up most of the character. So the masks were used, like I said, in Commedia dell'arte, which is exaggerated features, which helps the mask create a more physical character. So very, very physical comedy, very what we might even perceive as slapstick in some areas. Many plays at this time, especially in the Renaissance, not so much in Rome, but in the Renaissance mainly, were centered around Christian themes, and the actor portraying God would often wear a gold mask, because the value was obviously placed, the church had high value obviously on God, and so they wanted to respect that and keep that tradition going in making God sacred in the plays. Moving from Rome, we are going to move on to Middle Eastern plays, and this spans, from Persia to the all Middle Eastern countries. Again, theater is not a huge part of Middle Eastern culture, but there are many elements of theater. So, for example, public speaking, very important, very storytelling, that type of thing. And many of the masks that were worn were used in mime performances. Or dance, and so it relates back to like ancient rituals. So since it's a very tribal society, a lot of tribes would have very different portrayals. Some had different gods, obviously before Islam spread. And so it's actually this picture here portrays a more modern play using Middle Eastern themes. So I don't believe that this particular play was performed in a Middle Eastern country, but it portrays those gods and portrays those the spiritual, those ceremonies. So that's how masks were used in Middle Eastern culture. Now, moving on to Western Europe, this is a mask from Germany, and a lot of I believe this one is absolutely horrifying, but a lot of the masks in Western European theater have to do with a lot of folklore that actually branched out before Christianity spread, and it's very important to distinguish between the two, because these masks, obviously, like this one, portray evil spirits. And they would portray like ancient myths and in royal courts, mainly for kings. So performers had these elaborate masks that would portray these elements of various Western European folklore. for the entertainment of royalty. And these masks are actually still seen today. Like I believe this, for example, is an example of the Krampus festival in Austria. And what that is basically these red-faced demon characters run around and they are known to even beat people. I read that they beat people for being out on Christmas Day. So a lot of times they mix these, as is seen in a lot of Western European countries, the previous pagan religions often mixed and intertwined traditions with the church. So that's a very interesting look into how that theater and that culture is incorporated with the church. And finally, we're going to end our presentation with a swoop back to Asia in Japan. So although masks are not used as much in modern Japanese kabuki theater, the style got its origin from its earlier forms involving complex masks, and that's no theater. So the use of masks in ancient rituals quickly transformed into a sophisticated art form in Japan. So I would say out of all the cultures I've presented about with masks, the Japanese definitely had the most complex use of masks. The most complex masks were created in Japanese culture. So the use of masks in Japan created sometime they often required like multiple people to operate the masks. So sometimes they were huge, and sometimes they would have moving parts, and those were obviously a little bit different in performance style than a traditional just one mask, a character wearing a mask. Like I said, the masks in no theater often portrayed gods, historical figures, and also different personalities as well. So, for example, if you're a madman, like your face is gonna, exaggerated eyebrows, for example, are gonna point downward, or if you're extremely happy, maybe open up. So the facial expression pretty much stays the same. And like Chinese and like especially Korean theater, the actor is forced to base his physical movements off of the mask's expression. Like this one, for example, portrays, I mean, it's pretty obvious when you look at it, like a grumpy old man, a very, this may have been a historical figure. I wasn't able to find out whether or not this one was a historical figure, but you can tell by the features that are given in this mask. For example, the wrinkles on the side of the face, the frown gesture. He's obviously not a happy character, and this would stay the same throughout the entire performance. So this would require the actor to base all of his physical movements off of this face. So those are the masks, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.